Welcome to the Flourishing Leader Podcast, where we dive into the dynamics of the professional working world. I'm Audrey Simmons.
And I'm Belinda Joseph-Pirame. This podcast is dedicated to inspiring leaders to live a life of well-being, both personally and professionally, so that they too may flourish. I'm really excited to be here today because we're going to be kicking off the first season of our podcast where we're going to be focusing on stress. And so we're going to be discussing leaders and managing technostress. So when I think of technostress, it feels like one of those descriptions where it kind of does what it says on the tin. For me, it's the stress that comes up from having to engage with any kind of technology or system that involves technology. And that's the first thing that comes to mind for me. How about you?
Yeah, for me, when I think of technostress, I think of those moments where the internet just goes out and your blood pressure just skyrockets. It's just those moments almost where you trust technology to be there and it doesn't always show up the way that you're counting on it to. So that's definitely an example of technostress that comes to mind. And then I think another definition too, or another factor in it is just this newness that comes with relearning the same skills, whether that's bookkeeping or finances. You're having to relearn those skills over and over again. I think that could be taxing.
Yeah, and I tend to hear a lot of that from people, actually, these different frustrations they have around technology, whether it's at work or at home. So that leads me to wonder about the technology itself. Like when we're talking about technostress, what specifically are we including? Because what people will tell me about, for example, is about their relationships with their phone, for example, or their laptop, or that there's maybe a new system that's being put in place in their places of work. I don't know what comes to mind when you think of technology specifically.
Well, I love what you just said, Belinda. It's like the relationship. It's the relationship with the technology. I mean, because for me, the most technology I work with is phone, computer, that sort of thing. But I love the way you said it's the relationship of technology. So I would say that the piece of technology for me just depends on what I'm using at that moment, which I guess also speaks to the lack of stability because we're in that beginner stage just more frequently than ever before in society because there's just so much relearning going on. So I think it's a relationship, coming back to that, it's a relationship with the technology.
You know, I was just thinking of some of the leaders that I'm in conversations with and what I hear from them in terms of their relationships with their work phone, for example, and the impact that might have on them, or, you know, a new system being adopted in their place of work and their role in trying to support others with their relationship with that system or that piece of technology or that piece of software. It can be really stressful for people.
It makes me think in technology, it's almost like there's just a lot of novice individuals just because there's probably more users than there are creators. So there's few experts, but then the rest of us really almost need coping skills or a different context to view our relationship with technology in that so that we don't get burned out by being in that novice role over and over and over again. So like, what is that impact of being in that novice role around technology? Or what is the impact of technostress, more broadly speaking?
I suppose the thought that crossed my mind is, I guess it also depends on how you feel about being a novice. You know, when taking on a new piece of technology or a new task, there are some people that are really up for instructions and the learning, and other people that are less patient with it. If you feel fairly confident, you can wrap your head around things and get going, then I guess times are stress-free. Whereas if you see yourself as less adept, or you are less adept, you can see how that might create more stress and worry.
So from like a physical and emotional standpoint, one of the things that I appreciate is the work that I do with leaders that have ADHD or ADHD-like characteristics. And then also from my own lived experience, because I myself have ADHD. But I think from that perspective, technology requires some intentional boundaries to be set by the individual just to protect them from themselves, so to speak. But I think all of us have experienced, maybe some doom scrolling at the end of the night where you're just scrolling. And when you look up and it's 1:00 in the morning and it's like, oh my gosh, what have I just done to myself? But I think it's that, like putting limitations on exposure, that, and also it's the relationship you have with that technology. And so really monitoring what your felt experience is while you're engaging with the technology so that you notice signs of maybe irritability coming on or frustration. And before it gets to be a crisis, AKA, pounding your phone on the desk, you're able to make some other choices before it sort of just zaps your energy because it's so frustrating. Frustrating in that it's not working, frustrating in that it's consuming a lot of your time that's not value added, perhaps. Because I think a lot of technology is geared to capturing focus and attention. And that is one thing that individuals that have ADHD or ADHD-like characteristics really have to protect. They have to protect their focus because they want to focus on everything, which makes them the ideal candidate for many technologies, but not so great for them as individuals.
So you raised some important points, actually, in terms of what you're describing about people that experience ADHD or ADHD tendencies. And some of those things you've highlighted are really relevant broadly, I think, as well. So a number of the clients that I come into contact with, or just people, experience a lot in terms of their impact on their mental health, their mood, their relationships, the professional sphere and the personal sphere. And there's no longer a really bold distinction between them, particularly for people that are hybrid working. And so, people will be responding to emails or picking up messages, and that sort of impacts them in their relationships. There's something about the impact of what they're engaging with using technology that seems really apparent. Sometimes in terms of what's going on in the world as well, depending on the work that's being done, people are also experiencing, engaging with traumatic imagery. I've seen quite a few clients since October, actually, who've been really impacted by what's going on in the world and seeing, disturbing imagery.
I mean, that's a great point, because when I think back to growing up, there was set times, and I may be aging myself, but there were set times that you got news. It was 6:00 news, the 5:00 news, 60 Minutes on Sunday evenings. There were set times, and now it's constant. There's constantly information being pushed to the user. I think the other thing that's really fascinating that I've noticed in my own experience is how my irritability will skyrocket when I have a piece of technology, maybe my phone, and I'm also trying to do something else. It's doing those two things at the same time, which multitasking, we know by research doesn't work. It's not good for you. And we still do it without thinking too much about it. But the other day I was, in the car and trying, and I know I'm not supposed to do this, but trying to send a quick text. And the moment I go to pick up my phone, my irritability just skyrockets. Like, it was just so fascinating. And I remember being like, okay, you were not feeling irritated a minute ago. So see what happens when you put the phone back down, and not, because I didn't get a chance to even send the text, because I just noticed this experience I was having. And I was like, all right, so I put the phone down immediately. I could just feel the tension just like coming off my body. But the second I went to reach for that phone to try to just send a real quick text, it was noticeably different.
No, and it's interesting because those repeated experiences, something that, our bodies are processing, that has an impact repeatedly over time. I mean, one of the things that will get under my skin is if the human element is removed from something. So, I just like a conversation with a human being.
Shocking, Belinda. I mean, that's a really big request. You know that.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to speak to a person. I just want to speak to a human being.
Give me a human.
The human element is kind of being removed, and that's sometimes a shame, I think. But that's just me. Mm-hmm. The Flourishing Leader podcast has two sponsors, Team of Greats, LLC, and Eudaimonic Therapy and Coaching. Our first sponsor, Eudaimonic Therapy and Coaching, provides psychotherapy for people struggling with stress, anxiety, and depression. Also on offer is executive coaching for leaders experiencing stress, burnout, and other wellbeing issues blocking personal effectiveness. For information or to book a free consultation, please visit www.eudaimonic.co.uk. That's www.eudaimonic.co.uk.
Our second sponsor is Team of Greats. Team of Greats is a coaching company partnering with professionals around the world, including those with ADHD or ADHD-like characteristics, offering individual leadership coaching, team coaching, and mindfulness courses. For more information, reach out to www.teamofgreats, that's GREATS.com, teamofgreats.com.
Okay, so given that we've identified these things then, in just starting to think about technostress, if we think in terms of leaders, how can a leader cope with or alleviate technostress?
I think there's so many different ways to cope with technostress. One of the ways is really noticing and being aware that technostress exists and could be contributing to your experience of your day to day or your experience of your processes, and not discrediting that, like, it's not a big deal. This is just part of life. It isn't really part of life. It's really brand new, to really be clear about it. And it does require some awareness, and talking about it, I think, is really important for leaders, because it normalizes that, yes, this is true, this is happening. And awareness, just like noticing, has a lot of power in it to shift behavior. And what I mean by that, to be clear, is just when we say to somebody, you need to start this, or you need to stop that, there's very little room for error, versus let's just start and notice how technostress is showing up in your life. Just notice, what does that tension feel like to you? How does it show up? I think is really valuable for leaders themselves and also for their teams. It just gets the conversation going.
Yeah, it's really important, I think, what you're saying about the noticing, because there's a level at which, I don't know if you feel this, that technostress is just sort of acceptable in a way. We just accept that somehow we might feel stressed because something isn't working, and it can go by, it can go unnoticed, and it's just this thing that's off to the side that we're not quite paying attention to.
I agree. I think that there is this assumption that it's just part of life and it's sort of like just deal with it. Sometimes I forget that technology is actually in place to make my life easier so that I have more room in my life to rest, to create, to engage in those things that will really feed my spirit.
I mean, there's an interesting irony in a way, because I was thinking about what you were saying earlier about, the engagement with social media and being in that, I think you used the term doom scrolling. And, sometimes when I hear leaders or people talking about doing just that, there's an aspect of that where it sounds like the person's trying to create space for themselves by doing it, but actually they're filling it full of just stuff. So it's not really this real downtime, creating space kind of activity. That's not to put a downer on social media entirely. It has its place and is useful in many ways. But just in terms of what I hear around the impact on people's mental health. Another one of the things that I was thinking about in terms of what can alleviate technostress for leaders is that thing of leading by example. And so, being that person that's boundaried with technology, not having the expectation that staff teams are sort of tied to their devices out of hours or late at night, not emailing really late, just embodying a kind of healthy, boundaried relationship with technology so that staff teams can kind of follow suit and understand what the expectations are around that. Because I've heard many people talk about sort of receiving an email really late at night and feeling like they had to respond to it. And then they were thinking about the email over the whole of the weekend and they couldn't quite rest. And yeah, it just raises that thing about, just walking the walk and talking the talk.
Yeah, we are always sending a message with everything we do, whether it's the words we use or the actions we take or how we show up, we're always sending a message. And leaders can tell their teams all they want that, hey, don't respond. But if you're sending it, how is that role modeling boundaries or even self-control around, okay, I don't want to send this email to you because I don't have any expectation that you're going to respond, but I'm going to send it anyway because then it's off my to-do list. It doesn't really provide a really strong example to underscore the message that you're sending to only respond during working hours.
Yeah, and maybe not underestimating the impact of that, because if you're the leader and you have your staff team, then there is a power imbalance there. Whether it's spoken about or implied, there is a power imbalance there. So if you as a leader are making a request, if you're sending something late on a Friday, the person may well keep hold of that. And of course, I guess there's a debate in there about the boundaries of your staff team as well and how they manage themselves. But still, I think just in terms of just good relationship building, just having that kind of awareness and empathy. Is it something that really does need to go so late at night? Can it really not wait? Is it so urgent? If it's urgent, then I guess it's understood that it should go. But outside of that, perhaps it's something that can wait.
And it's sort of like balance. So if there's an urgent email to send, first off, I don't know that urgent and email should be included in the same sentence. If it's that urgent, it needs to be a phone call. And because it's like that big interruption, that needs a high touch point. So that needs connection, and connection is, on the phone via voice where you're hearing really another element of that communication happening that isn't available to you during email. And you're also really underscoring then, listen, if I need you, I will call you. Do not be checking your email just all the time, just in case there's an urgent email coming through. And I think that goes into setting good boundaries, like you said, around expectations, like getting clarity around expectations. We teach people how to communicate to us, with us, how to do that. I think that's really important too, that really being clear what technology should be used when, like the email versus phone versus text, having those good boundaries and expectations be really clear. I think too, noticing as you progress through your day, where are opportunities that you are most vulnerable, as in vulnerable, like that willpower throughout the course of the day, it just becomes a little bit weaker. It's like a muscle. So you've used it a lot during the day. So chances are you're the most vulnerable in the evening. And that tends to be where we say, well, I deserve this time to scroll and just to check out. But I think there's a lot of value in noticing, okay, am I really getting the experience I wanted after I engage in this activity? And being honest with yourself and holding yourself accountable around, if it's not the experience you wanted, why are you still doing it? Like, what keeps you engaged in an activity over and over and over again if it's not giving you the results you want? So setting good boundaries, what's really important is knowing yourself, knowing your strengths, knowing your weaknesses, knowing when you are at a point where you're the most vulnerable for being distracted. If the goal is to relax and have time to yourself, is engaging in this particular technology really important or not?
Yeah, it's so important what you're saying about setting boundaries, like the boundary between work life and home life. For many people, particularly during the pandemic, that became less solid. Each arena sort of bled into the other. And that's continuing to happen to some extent with hybrid working arrangements and work from home arrangements. So I think just having those rules that are based in the needs that you have for yourself and the needs of the people around you, both in your work life and your professional life, like being clear on a good, healthy boundary is so important, I think, for just being able to maintain your overall mental health and well-being over time. And those boundaries, they're going to be based in what you need, in all kinds of needs. So one of the examples, just to pick up something that we talked about earlier about doom scrolling, most people need a good night's sleep. So there may be a boundary or a rule that somebody can set around, okay, this is the time I'm going to give myself to do my little bit of scrolling. And then this is the time when devices go off and they get left until the following day and so on. And in terms of some of the other things I've been pondering about, and I know that we've spoken about at different times around just attending to that Technostress, is psychological safety as well. I think as a leader, it's really important to offer a space where it feels safe for everyone to speak up about their experiences with technology or a system that's been onboarded, in a way where constructive criticism can be given without fear of punishment or negative consequence. Able to have sort of open, honest, supportive discussions is so vital, I think, in terms of helping people to feel supported and less stressed about things.
Yeah, the other thing I just thought about, just really honoring what people say their experience is. I think there's an opportunity in all industries because of the multi-generational workforce that is in existence. We have a generation that's very, very accustomed and in tune with technology. And then we have another generation that it's probably not their first choice. And how can we build that bridge so that there's that peer-to-peer support that's really honoring that we are in different phases of life, and that's okay. We don't all have to be the same. I just think there's an opportunity there inside of the psychological safety, really honoring, like if somebody's like, listen, I'm stressed out because I have to learn another charting system. And maybe there's a generation that's like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to learn this. This will be so much better than the last. But having that space to have those dialogues, right?
Yeah, 100%. Meeting people where they're at and ensuring that they're supported and being responsive to what they may be raising as a concern. I mean, because I think there's something about attending to all of that that can only make life easier for a leader as well.
Oh, yeah. And I think a lot of leaders maybe at times feel like having these conversations is so time consuming that it's not worth the time to have it. And I would counter that with, it is worth your time to have because it's an investment in the well-being of yourself and your team. And that's huge. When you think about what happens when that isn't respected or supported, the turnover rates, the expenses that are incurred when you're trying to replace somebody on the team. I mean, it's a high price tag to not create the psychological safety that is needed, not only for conversation around technostress, but for all conversations. But yeah, I can definitely see the value in that.
I also wondered if it requires a sort of degree of honesty as well, if leaders are also struggling with that technology. You know, sometimes leaders want to be seen to have the reins, to know what they're doing. Not all, but I've certainly encountered leaders that want to look as if they know what they're doing. And they may not if there's a new piece of technology kind of being brought into an organization. They also can struggle with these things. And I think it's just having the humility and openness and honesty to say, actually, yeah, I struggle with this too. This doesn't quite make sense to me either. You know, where do we go from here?
I think another way that leaders can cope or alleviate technostress is through the practice of mindfulness. And I know the word mindfulness seems to be thrown about, and I'm not sure that all the time people understand the value that mindfulness can really bring and the power that it brings. But practicing noticing, like building that muscle, the ability to notice what's going on around you and internally inside of you, to know what's going on and not be carried away by it, not be overwhelmed by it, is a very powerful skill for leaders to develop. Inside of technostress, mindfulness can really show up, and it allows us to notice how our bodies are responding to the choices we make and create a moment of reflection to be like, okay, do I want to continue down this path? So that's really valuable, especially inside of the design work that goes into the technology piece, where if the goal is to capture your focus and to keep you on the device as long as possible, then mindfulness becomes really important because there's an ability to unhook yourself from that pull. But it's the mindfulness piece that allows you to notice the pull in the first place. So what I mean by that is pull, like P-U-L-L, like the pull of that technology, that the stickiness of it that keeps you engaged in it, that whatever thought you have that keeps you for another 5 minutes. So a good example that people can relate to is like when you're leaving your work day, if you have the thought, oh, let me get this one more thing done, like one more email, then that thought, that one more thing, is a sign to you that that is exactly the moment you need to be packing up. That it's not the time to do one more thing, it's the time to be packing up. So it's sort of like with technology, if you notice that pull of like, that's weird, my hands are going numb, and my hands no longer work well because of holding this device in my hand for an hour or two before bed, you notice these things, you can make a different decision. Like, just saying, okay, well, when my hands go numb, that's a sign that I'm definitely have been on this device for way too long. But it's that power of being able to notice how your body's really interpreting what you're doing, because I think we can get so distracted, we don't even realize what's going on until we're in pain.
Another thing that comes to mind as well is I know that in some European countries, they've implemented a permission to disconnect. Just giving yourself the permission to say, actually, that's it. I'm done for the day now. I'm switching all of this stuff off. It will be waiting for me here tomorrow. There is no clear desk policy here. There's always going to be stuff to do, to get done, to catch up with. There's always going to be one more thing. As long as I have a job, there's always going to be one more thing. So just allowing yourself to say, actually, that's it now. But today I can come back to this later.
I think there's so much value in creating policies and procedures to support the message that you're giving to the organization as a whole. And the leader can definitely lead by example, but for an organization to take a firm stance that, yes, we are absolutely, not that they have to give permission to disconnect, but they are in alignment and they have it written down as part of the policy. I think there's so much power and value in that, for sure.
Yeah. It also allows people to protect themselves, doesn't it? If you're working with people or working for somebody who is not thinking in terms of permission to disconnect. Some of the clients that I've engaged with have spoken about the written contract and the unwritten contract. So, that thing of the written contract says I finish work at, let's say, 6:30 p.m., but that is not the time that is good for you to be seen walking out of the building. There is an unwritten contract, and the unwritten contract is you work late. So I think those permission to disconnect kind of practices and policies really offers people the opportunity to maybe protect themselves a little in terms of a culture that they might be working in as well.
Yeah. And as far as training around Technostress, there are 8-week courses that really do a deeper dive around mindfulness. I know that Team of Greats has their mindfulness course for busy people, which is inspired by the mindfulness-based stress reduction program that was created in the late 1970s and is the most well-researched mindfulness program in the world. The reason for that 8 weeks is to really just integrate it into your life. So the mindfulness training, so that you're able to really practice developing that noticing muscle and the ability to really observe your experience of life, and doing that with a gentle curiosity and a spirit of non-judgment, because you're just there to observe, to just notice what's happening like a scientist. And so the benefit of taking a course like that is that it really is an in-depth training that sort of integrates it into your life. It would be hard to walk away from an 8-week course specifically with mindfulness and not be changed by it. So I think there's a lot of value, even though it is a time investment in the beginning. It can be a great tool for people to use in all aspects of their life for the rest of their lives. And how cool that it's something you can always bring with you. So when I look at different training courses, I think about the relationship that we have with technology. And so if that's really the thing that will give us the biggest bang for our buck, so to speak, is concentrating on noticing what the relationship is, then I would think that doing mindfulness training would really support that ability to be aware of how technology is impacting you.
Yeah, agreed. I think as a leader, it's important to consider seeking help for oneself as well as your staff teams, and encouraging them to seek help if they need it, because what I am seeing over and over, I don't know if you're having this experience, Audrey, is that stress levels are entirely too high, particularly amongst the senior leader population, really alarmingly high. And their relationship with technology is a component part of the stress that people are experiencing. And so I think it's really important, whether it's that you are going and seeking coaching or therapy or integrated coaching, or whether it's other forms of support to help you at a more physiological level or a spiritual level, whatever it is. I think there's something about just, getting in early and understanding that there is no shame in seeking help for yourself. Actually, I would consider it a sign of strength and resourcefulness to just recognize that you have needs that need to be met and go chase that.
Yeah. Asking for help is a strength. It's not a weakness.
Yeah, 100%. So to you, the listener, we just want to thank you for joining us today. And we definitely hope there are things that you can take away from our conversation. There are some links in the show notes if you or your organization are interested in finding out more about Technostress and how to alleviate it. And so from both of us, we say bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Flourishing Leader Podcast. We would love to hear directly from you. Please reach out to us by emailing contact@theflourishingleaderpodcast.com.
As we all know, supporting what you enjoy by taking action matters. If you enjoyed today's show, please make sure you subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review.
You can also find us on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and LinkedIn.
Thank you again for listening in. We look forward to hearing from you. Until next time, take good care of yourself.